Okay, the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 17147 in the name of Sarah Boyack on Scottish Youth Parliament's work on transport. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons. I invite Sarah Boyack to open the debate around 7 minutes. Ms Boyack.
Presiding Officer, it's a real honour to open this important members' debate on the contribution of the Scottish Youth Parliament to our evolving transport system. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to colleagues who have supported securing the time for this debate, because ensuring that Scotland's young people have access to safe, affordable, accessible and sustainable transport is vital to their well-being, social inclusion and future opportunities. And I was motivated to bring forward this motion after attending a meeting of the cross-party group on sustainable transport. At the meeting, MYSPs shared first-hand experiences, especially from rural, island and Lothian communities, highlighting the barriers that speak directly to the lived realities of young Scots. And young person's words resonated with me deeply. The young people's free bus pass is great, but it's not much use if there isn't a bus to use it on. All of us should reflect on that comment. The young people's free bus pass is great, but it's not much use if there isn't a bus to use it on. So the SYP's Transport, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee has been working hard on transport, championing issues such as rural infrastructure deficits, accessibility for disabled young people and safety at bus stops and on vehicles. And their timely and considered interventions remind us that policy must be grounded in lived experience if it is to serve our communities. And their committee represents the voices of our future in terms of transport and how much is really needed to give young people the access they deserve. Because young people need access to transport to live their lives to the full, whether it's accessing education, whether it's accessing sports and leisure, visiting friends and family, or whether it's getting to and from work. For all of these activities, they need access to accessible, affordable, reliable public transport. And this week, we've had a Scottish Youth Parliament stall that MSPs have been able to visit, and they've been giving us copies of their manifesto, Dear Scotland's Future for Young People, by young people, reflecting voices from nearly 5,000 young people across 32 local authorities, including strong input from the Lothians. And their manifesto places sustainable transport and a just and fairer Scotland at its core, not as an aspiration, but as an immediate priority. Their manifesto says that Transport Scotland and public transport companies should ensure that public transport services are accessible and reliable for young people across Scotland, particularly for those living in rural areas. Now, we had an excellent debate earlier in the Chamber this week about Scotland's railways. We need to build on the successes over the lifetime of this Parliament, whether it's Airdrie to Bathgate, Larkhall to Mulgai, Stirling to Alloa, the Borders Railway, or the reopening of the Leavenmouth Rail Link in June 24, which has reconnected communities to Edinburgh, promising improved access for young people in Fife for commuting, study and social participation, something that can only happen if we get safe and reliable transportation throughout the country. And there are plans to progressing decarbonisation of the network. But we all know there is so much more to be done to increase capacity in our public transport services, because we've seen hundreds of bus services lost in recent years. And as reports from Audit Scotland and the Climate Change Committee have stated, Scotland's ambition to reduce car usage by 20% by 2030 is off track. But that's absolutely critical if we're going to deliver the change young people need for a safe future, given the increasingly negative impact we're seeing of the climate and nature emergencies in extreme weather, wildfires, excessive heat and flooding. So there has been some progress made, with 203 miles of walking, wheeling and cycling routes added last year, but overall funding for active travel has fallen significantly in the 2025-26 budget. And it's precisely in this context where policy ambition, climate commitments and young people's lived experience intersect that the SYP's work becomes essential. So their advocacy on accessibility, safety, affordability, inclusion and co-design is not just relevant, it's vital. So young people need the bus services they can use in their communities. And as their manifesto says, supported public transport is essential for young people to live their lives freely. So, I know to move towards a conclusion. Let us reaffirm the critical message. The Scottish Youth Parliament has not just identified failings in our transport system, but they're calling for action with practical, inclusive and future-focused solutions. And young people need to be involved in shaping our transport services. I found it inspiring to hear from the Welsh Youth Parliament at our recent CPA Region Conference in Cardiff, and to hear from young women at our CPA Regional Women's Conference in our Scottish Parliament was inspiring earlier this year. The manifesto from the SYP calls for accessible, equitable transport, safer infrastructure, more reliable rural services and extending free travel to under 26s. All underpinned by youth participation at every stage. They will also ask to be involved in local and national decisions to create a public transport system with equal access for all, reducing geographic inequalities and barriers for young people to access the system. So, challenges for all parties to translate this energy and evidence into action, to invest in reliable and local rural services, active travel and inclusive design, ensure safety and accessibility are built in, that it's core to public transport planning, and having staff to keep people safe across our bus and rail services, but to embed youth voices in co-design, policy, delivery and oversight, and to bridge the gaps that are holding young people back from the Lothians to our islands, from urban to rural area communities, and to create joined up and sustainable transport. So I urge the Scottish Government in these last months of this parliamentary session to say what will happen following our cross-party group's recommendations on Mind the Gap earlier this year, and to hear about the SYP's manifesto and what can be done now. We need to listen to our young people's experience, to build a transport that not just for them, but with them, and a system that unlocks opportunities, builds bridges, advances decarbonisation, for enabling them to use low-carbon travel options on a daily basis and to deliver the fairer Scotland called for by the SYP that our young people so richly deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. We now move to the open debate. I call first Alistair Allen, to be followed by Sue Webber. Around 4 minutes, Dr Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I firstly thank Sarah Boyack for bringing this important debate to the Chamber today, and also congratulate the work of the Scottish Youth Parliament, whose local representatives are at each of the respective ends of my constituency, Ellie, Denny and Alana Logue. As the MSP for an Island constituency, issues such as flights from island airports, ferry services, rural bus services are topics that are often raised with me. But I think today's debate reminds us that the topic of connectivity has a specific impact on Scotland's young islanders. So can I express my thanks to the Scottish Youth Parliament, especially those rural and island representatives, for their hard work in producing their 2631 manifesto, which sets out, inter alia, the Scottish Youth Parliament's transport priorities on behalf of all young Scots. I'm certainly encouraged that many of the Scottish Government's transport policies have been welcomed by the Youth Parliament. I know that in my constituency, policies such as introducing free inter-island ferry travel and 2 free round-trip ferry crossings a year to the mainland for under-22s have been welcomed. I realise that the Youth Parliament would like to see this entitlement grow and develop, and perhaps the Minister, in summing up, will be able to respond to the asks made by the Youth Parliament around that. Presiding Officer, improving connectivity and tackling island depopulation are closely interlinked challenges. Understanding the challenges faced by young people is essential not only to improving our current transport network in the islands, but also to building a future transport network that will help encourage younger islanders to either stay or to return to their island communities. Getting our transport infrastructure right can make the islands a more attractive place for young people once they finish university or college, and also think about entering the workforce or starting a business. So, going forward, I hope today's debate has encouraged young islanders to become involved in local conversations and debates about transport services, both at national and local level. Later this month, High Transit are launching their rural transport strategy here in Holyrood, and I hope that members will find ways to bring members of the Scottish Youth Parliament's views on transport issues into our discussions in this place. Locally, in my constituency, the Western Isles Ferry Group meets monthly to find solutions and works constructively to sustain and improve ferry connectivity. And following recent conversations and attending today's debate, I hope that the group will share my view that inviting a young representative to a forthcoming meeting of that group would be a good place to kick off that conversation. To summarise, Presiding Officer, young islanders require good connectivity links. Indeed, through the Scottish Youth Parliament, they can provide us with their unique insight into how we can continue to improve our transport network and to make our islands, as well as the whole of Scotland, a more attractive place for young people in the future.
Thank you very much. And I call Sue Webber to be followed by Martin Whitfield. Around 4 minutes, Ms Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And yes, also extend my thanks to Sarah Boyack for bringing this debate to the Chamber this afternoon, and also congratulate the work on the Scottish Youth Parliament, which is really about reinforcing the importance of youth voices when we discuss transport needs for our country. And you can't disagree with the statement that public transport should be affordable, safe, accessible and reliable, not just for young people, but for everyone across Lothian and across Scotland. And here in Edinburgh and the Lothians, we're lucky enough to have an award-winning first-rate bus services, Lothian buses. However, other parts of the country are not so fortunate and suffer from an extremely limited bus service and infrastructure, and in some cases, none. And we all know the importance of good transport links to the Scottish economy and business, but these links also play a key role in our social development. And Dr Allen outlined some specifics there about the challenges for the islands and rural communities. And I have colleagues that come to me from Scottish Conservatives that are always telling me of the limitations and the lack of public transport in their rural areas. And that inequality is not acceptable. We need good transport links to form the backbone of our communities. They link people to work, education, leisure, and they offer that real direct alternative to car travel. And the benefits of good public transport are particularly important for young people's access to social, educational and employment opportunities, and gives them independence. College, university, apprenticeships, work are so important to them as they grow into young adults. And the Young Persons Under 22 bus travel scheme has attracted a huge number of participants and has increased the mobility of our young people, as I've said. But I do want to talk about a little bit of the challenge. Most people exercise their participation in the Under 22 scheme thoughtfully. There are, however, groups of youths that are abusing the scheme and engage in anti-social behaviour. The actions of this very disruptive minority are unacceptable, but we must be prepared to tackle this anti-social behaviour head-on. And as Shadow Minister for Transport in the Scottish Parliament, I spent an evening on patrol with Lothian buses. In a second, Dr Allen, I will. I've spent an evening on patrol with Lothian buses and Police Scotland, and I got to witness firsthand and hear the views about the growing problems of antisocial behaviour when speaking to drivers and passengers. Dr Allen.
Yes, I thank the member for giving way, and I would obviously agree entirely with what the member says about tackling antisocial behaviour and the problem it causes on transport. I'm sure she would, however, wish to put on the record that antisocial behaviour on public transport is not restricted to people under the age of 22.
Sue Webber.
Lothian buses have done an awful lot of studying and a lot of data analysis, and they're the only bus company that has done this, and they are showing a direct correlation between the increase in antisocial behaviour and violence on their buses with the introduction of the Under 22 bus pass. I can't hide away from that. With due respect, Mr Ruskell, I've actually only got 30 seconds left and I've got tons to say. And I know there's no doubt the removal of this free bus pass would make a difference. And I don't want it to be, I want it to be taken for those that are really causing significant antisocial behaviour. And I'm hoping that the Minister will provide in his update as to where we are with this, because the First Minister has said that work is underway to develop the system that would strip under-22s of their entitlement following repeated bad behaviour, and I look forward to this being implemented. First, I was going to call yourself First Minister, Presiding Officer.
Don't do that.
So right now, I know that there is such an opportunity to allow our young people their voices to influence our transport for the future, and I am delighted that this debate is taking part this afternoon. Thank you, Sarah Boyack.
Thank you very much. I now call Martin Whitfield to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Around 4 minutes, Mr Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer, and like others, can I first thank Sarah Boyack for securing this debate on what is an incredibly important motion on the week where we are joined in this Parliament, both here today for this debate, but also in the Garden Lobby, so that people can meet with the Scottish Youth Parliament and discuss their manifesto. The Scottish Youth Parliament's manifesto, Dear Scotland's Future, is based on the voices of more than 5,000 young people, and it makes clear that transport is about so much more than convenience. It is about reaching school and college. It is about travelling safely to youth work, to community groups. It's about the opportunity to take up jobs and apprenticeships. But it's also about staying connected with your family and friends, because without it, we will hold young people back. The manifesto sets out some very clear priorities. It calls for cheaper and fairer ticketing systems, joined-up network across buses, trains, ferries, real accessibility for disabled young people and those with additional needs. And it presses for the better provision in rural and island communities that we've already heard about in this debate. The free bus travel scheme for under-22s is a welcome step, and it has made a massive difference to thousands of young people. But as MSYPs have said, if you live in the rural community or on an island, or indeed in a city at certain times of the day where the services have been cut, what is the point of a free bus card if there is no bus? You need that service. And we hear stories across Scotland, buses that never arrive, services cancelled at short notice, connections that just don't link up. Wheelchair users who are left abandoned at stops. And they're not isolated cases, but everyday barriers for our young people. The manifesto highlights safety. Young people, especially young women and girls, want public transport to be safer, better lighting, working CCTV, a culture where harassment is never tolerated. The Scottish Youth Parliament is right to be ambitious. They're calling for a properly integrated network where timetables connect, for transport that disabled young people can truly rely on, and for an expansion of that free travel. Because a 23-year-old apprentice on a minimum wage faces exactly the same barriers as he or she did only a few days earlier when they were 22. These are bold demands, but they are rooted in real experience. Deputy Presiding Officer, transport is not just about moving from A to B. It is about opportunity. It is about fairness. It is about dignity. And if young people cannot rely on public transport, then they cannot rely on us as their decision makers. So let us do more than just acknowledge their voices. Let us listen to them, act on what they are telling us. And if we want young people to believe in politics, they need to see that when they speak, we hear and we deliver. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. I now call Mark Ruskell to be followed by Cal Mochan, again around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to join members in thanking Sarah Boyack for this motion, and also to thank the Scottish Youth Parliament for their excellent manifesto. And I was really struck by the amount of work that has gone into it. So I really commend those MSYPs who have been involved, and of course the staff and volunteers who've helped them with it. My own party's manifesto process for next year's Holyrood election is underway, and I'm looking forward to discussing with MSYPs about how their asks can be delivered in the next session of the Scottish Parliament. And I'd like to give a special mention to Isla Jackson MSYP, who has been a regular contributor to the Scottish Parliament's CPG on sustainable transport. Now, there are two areas specifically covered in the Transport Manifesto: accessible and reliable public transport, and the need to maintain and expand free travel for young people. And I think we need to take on board the challenge to make public transport fit for purpose for all. That doesn't just mean able-bodied people in the Central Belt. We must invest in transport that gives opportunities for young rural people to have equity of access to work, education and to socialise. And disabled young people across the country really need services on which they can rely, with joined-up timetabling and ticketing. And when I recently visited the ScotRail Customer Service Centre, I heard about the excellent work that they do with platform information to ensure that people are not left isolated at stations. And, I do commend this work, but I'm also aware of constituents who've contacted me with physical disabilities who at times feel really let down by ScotRail not being there for them, and just how vulnerable that can make them feel at a platform. So when we think about the people most dependent on public transport, it is often the vulnerable, who may also be young and in some cases disabled. And that's why having staff available when needed is absolutely critical. Empowering people to feel safe and welcomed is very important on our whole public transportation network. And I'm also aware that, we're seeing innovation across the UK now, that a number of, English councils are trialling, for example, safety officers on buses, because there has been a rise in antisocial behaviour on buses in England. I would point out to Sue Webber, of course, in England, they don't have free bus travel for under 22. So we do need to have a joined-up approach to this. Earlier this week, I spoke of the Greens' ambition for the abolition of first-class tickets on ScotRail. And I think today's debate really underlines why we need that kind of measure, because we all deserve reliable, cheap and safe services. Nobody wants to be squeezed like sardines onto a busy commuter train, while 98% of first-class tickets go unsold. Now, I appreciated the acknowledgement in the SYP manifesto of the success of the under-22s free bus travel scheme that my party pushed so hard for. And I really enjoyed reading the impact that it has had on the lives of young people across the country. And I agree with them that we should look to extend the scheme up to 26, and ideally it should not just be limited to bus either. Now, that policy originated from the Scottish Young Greens, who put a motion to our party conference tasking our MSPs to make progress on delivering it. And I was pleased that in 2020 we were able to agree with Kate Forbes, as part of her first budget, that free bus travel for under-19s was to be delivered. I was able to discuss with her at the time the findings of the Calendar Youth Project report, which highlighted the isolation and the lack of opportunity that comes from young people having to spend so much of their income on unreliable rural buses. Now, while the COVID pandemic delayed the delivery of free bus travel, we now have a hugely successful scheme that has been expanded to all people under 22. So I'd like to thank the Scottish Youth Parliament for their continued inspiration, their hard work, and I really look forward to further conversations ahead of the next Holyrood election.
Thank you, Mr Austell. And now call Carol Mochan to be followed by Graham Simpson. Again, around 4 minutes. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also, of course, like to thank Sarah Boyack for bringing this debate to the Chamber today. Throughout her time in Parliament, she has long been a champion for affordable, accessible and sustainable transport, and it is welcome that she brings the voices of the Scottish Youth Parliament into the Scottish Parliament debate today. It's been a great delight to read through a lot of the work on transport from the Youth Parliament, and I really want to congratulate the convener of the group, David McGilp, who represents my home area of Carrickcumnock and Doon Valley, which is in my South Scotland region, so that is absolutely tremendous to see. Public transport is an asset to many of our constituents, but none more so than to our young people. Within my South Scotland region, there exists many remote and rural towns and villages where connections with larger towns and cities are completely reliant on good public transport, whether it's for employment purposes, attending hospital appointments, or even to visit family and friends. Constituents depend on timely, reliable and regular transport. From the young to the elderly, public transport is a vehicle for social connection, and this must be considered when making decisions on provision. For young people, affordable and accessible transport is a key factor in enabling educational and employment opportunities. The Young Persons Under 22's free bus travel scheme has been a welcome step in improving the affordability of public transport and has been fantastic in improving access to travel for many young people. In my own South Scotland region, distances between towns and villages can be tens of miles, So the scheme is very welcome for the young people who are completely reliant on that bus service. And from my own point of view, in this rural community that I live in, I went to a school where there was about 15 schools all came together to that school. So you connected with your young friends at school, but it was really difficult when you were out of school and in the long holiday periods. But for my own children, they have made really good use of that, and that allows them just to have that real connection with their friends over the holidays. I do wish to note the committee's research. The young people, themselves have said that really, it really is a great thing to have, but if you have limited services, it really limits the opportunities, and that is really true in my own constituency. I also want to just lastly recognise the human rights issues associated with this issue. Under the UNCRC, children and young people have the right to rest and leisure, to engage in play and recreational activities, and the right to participate freely in cultural life and the arts. And it's the responsibility of the government, of all of us here in this place, this Parliament, to encourage the provision of appropriate and equal opportunities for cultural, artistic, recreational and leisure. And access to affordable and reliable transport plays a huge part in ensuring this right. We must all work together to make sure that experiences of young people are all as good as they possibly can be. And so that's why we all need to make sure that we make this work for people, particularly in those rural areas. And I hope the Minister has some information that he can feed back to us. To end, I want to just thank Sarah Boyack again for bringing this debate to the Parliament, to wish the young Youth Parliament all the successes and to continue to push us to make sure that we make sensible decisions around accessibility, infrastructure and affordability for young people in all aspects of our community, so that no one is left behind. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call Graeme Simpson to be followed by John Mason. Around 4 minutes, Mr Simpson.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Sarah Boyack for bringing this motion to the Chamber? And the background to it was a great piece of collaboration between the cross-party group on sustainable transport and the Scottish Youth Parliament. And actually, I thought it was a really good example of how a cross-party group can be effective in this Parliament. The cross-party group held an inquiry into inequalities in transport. Transport's got a vital role in delivering a fairer society and enabling everyone in Scotland to have equal access to daily life, work, education and community well-being. But there are gaps in the current system which mean that women, children, disabled people and low-income households don't have equal access to transport in Scotland. These groups experience barriers related to cost, availability, safety and convenience of the transport network. So we've got to create a fair and reliable transport system that everyone can access. We held a series of valuable evidence sessions looking at these different experiences when it comes to accessing transport. Each of the groups raised issues such as unaffordable fares, poor transport connectivity, inaccessible services and safety concerns. All of these have been raised already. And our report made a number of recommendations to the Scottish Government and transport authorities to achieve a transport system that works for everyone. These include defining what transport poverty is, better data collection and metrics to facilitate better monitoring, and we also called for transport authorities to implement lived experience participation with those most affected by transport inequalities. The Scottish Youth Parliament and Sustrans presented to the CPG meeting in October 2024, and they both highlighted the critical role of transport in shaping the lives of younger people. We've heard already, we had great presentations from David McGilp and Isla Jackson, MSPs, two fantastic young people, so impressive. They outlined the youth perspective on public transport, building on their All Aboard campaign, which helped secure free public transport for under-22s. They emphasised the importance of making transport accessible to all young people, especially those in rural and island communities. They called for the extension of the free travel scheme to those up to the age of 26. They didn't put a cost on that, I have to say, and recommended improvements in affordability, accessibility and frequency of public transport services. And a key theme emerging from the Q&A session was the critical need to involve young people in transport decision-making processes. Now, the free bus travel scheme for under 22s has made a significant difference to the lives of young people, but challenges remain around availability and reliability of services. Presiding Officer, earlier this year I joined the Transport, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee of the Scottish Youth Parliament to discuss transport and young people. They called for more reliable and frequent services, safer waiting areas, better route planning and ending negative attitudes towards young passengers. Presiding Officer, if I just close by saying it's been fantastic to work with members of the Youth Parliament on this, and it behoves all of us to listen to young people when we're designing public services like transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. We now move to the final speaker in open debate, John Mason. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to Sarah Boyack for bringing forward this topic today. I'm also a member of the cross-party group on sustainable transport, which Graham Simpson leads, and we were all united in being impressed, as we've heard, by the Youth Parliament's work on the subject of transport, and wanted to give it more of an airing within this Parliament for older people. And in the first place, can I say that I think we should be having more interaction and mutual working between the Youth Parliament and this place, whether that be at cross-party groups, committees or elsewhere. Over the years, I have appreciated meeting up with MSYPs, and in the present period that has been especially with the YMCA MSYPs, namely Andrew Will and Jonah Brooks, the latter being active within Tollcross YMCA in my constituency. Like others, I very much support the Youth Parliament's aims for affordable, accessible and reliable public transport. I appreciated reading their briefing for today's debate, as well as hearing from David McGilp and Isla Jackson at the CPG last October. I fully accept that there is a particular challenge with public transport in rural and island areas, where the more spread out population almost inevitably means frequent and affordable public transport is more difficult. However, the fact that it is difficult does not mean that we should ignore it, and I think we perhaps need to use a bit more imagination as to where we go with this. For example, when I was younger, the post bus was a great asset, carrying both mail and passengers, but sadly I think the last one ran in 2017. And hitchhiking too used to be a great way of getting around for young people. I did that myself, albeit not entirely reliable or running to a timetable, but at least it was free. However, again, times have moved on, and I saw hardly anyone hitching when I drove in the Highlands and Islands this summer. On some of the specifics in the Youth Parliament paper, I certainly do agree that under 22's bus travel scheme should be maintained. Expanding it to 26 or to cover trains as well would certainly come at a cost. However, perhaps there is room for compromise here, for example, by making the young person's rail card more attractive. Safety on public transport is definitely an issue, and not just for young people. We could do to see ScotRail staff being a bit more proactive in managing passenger behaviour on trains, and not just referring everyone to British Transport Police, who are clearly not present on very many trains at all. We're obviously considering transport today, but I would also mention the Scottish Youth Parliament Manifesto for 26 to 31, which I think has just recently been published and has 31 policies. And today we are focused in this debate on social policies 4 and 5. But I was particularly intrigued also by education policy number 2 on financial education. Some policies, like listening more to young people, should be happening anyway and should come at minimal cost. But others, like reduced or free train fares, clearly do cost money. So again, this brings up the question of taxation and the kind of country we want to live in. Do we want to be a low-tax country with poor public services, including poor public transport for younger people? Or are we willing to pay more tax through income, property, savings, etc., so that our young people get a better deal and better quality of life? These are questions primarily for our young people to be deciding on. It is all very well myself, aged 68, saying I want higher taxes and quality public services. However, it is for our young people to make these choices for the future, and absolutely they should be listened to right now. And part of that has to be increased financial education. Actually, the whole population probably needs increased financial education, possibly including some MSPs. But if we focus on young people to start with, we will not go far wrong. So congratulations to the Youth Parliament on all their work, and particularly this subject of transport, and I look forward to continuing engagement with the Scottish Youth Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mason. And I invite Jim Fairley to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And you can see by the scatter of papers are here, there's a whole load of things that I want to try to get through, but I think time will absolutely be against me. And I genuinely thank my colleague for bringing forward this debate. It's a brilliant debate to have, and I'm really taken by your enthusiasm that is clearly rubbed off from the Youth Parliament, that the member is so excited and taken by what it is that they have put into the debate. John Mason just made the point about the name of the manifesto commitment, and that is Dear Scotland's Future. I absolutely love the name of that manifesto commitment itself, because that really captures the spirit of what it is that we all have a responsibility and a duty to consider while we're in here, because it is that future are the things that we're legislating for, and it really does bring everything back into sharp focus. And as far as Sarah Boyack's points, there are a couple of things I'm going to pick up on. The free bus pass is great, but it's no use if you've got no bus. And she's absolutely correct, and I take that point on board. It's a discussion we've had on numerous occasions, and it's one of the things that we're looking at. How do we get that better? If we remember that we're still in a position where we're dealing with a deregulated industry, where it is private operators that are working in these areas, that's why we introduced all of the legislation that was produced in the 2019 Act is now in play. Local authorities have these abilities to be able to take interventions that is right for their area. I also want to let me finish this one point, and then I'll take your intervention. I also want to point out, as someone who lives in a rural constituency, I'm acutely aware of the problems for rural Scotland, and it's one of the things that I'm excited about is the extension of the plugged-in communities funding. We're just going to announce a £4 million fund for plugged-in communities to allow local communities to actually get the buses and the infrastructure in their area, because they will know their areas better than anyone, how to drive those routes, deliver those routes, and it's part of that community working to. And I'll take the intervention.
Sarah Boyack.
I appreciate the Minister for taking the intervention. I think a key issue is capacity for local authorities to use the legislation that we have supported in this Parliament. We've seen that for years. Lothian buses is absolutely fantastic, but the challenge of how you have local buses that are accountable in an area, local authorities are key. It's what more can the government do to support them? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I take the point on board that Sarah Boyack makes to me, and that's the whole point of the legislation, because it doesn't have to be one size fits all. There are a range of options in there for local authorities to take advantage of. But when you look at how Lothian buses have run with that direct link back into their local community, it shows that there are benefits there. But I wouldn't want to criticise the private operators to any great extent, other than to say they have a business to run. They have to be profitable in order to be able to make the investments that they will need to make. But we also have funding in there in the Network Support Grant to allow these local authorities to allow the operators to put funding in place that will allow them to run routes that are clearly not viable at that time. Alistair Allen was talking about the Youth Parliament and some of the asks that were in the Youth Parliament about extending the funding. And I'm going to reiterate, the Network Support Grant is really important in order to get these rural routes maintained. We don't have any funding available to increase the under-22 scheme as it currently stands. But what we are doing is we've increased the ferry provision. We've increased the number of ferries that are available to our young travellers. And when I was in Orkney and Shetland over the course of the summer, One of the things that they came back to me with, this is absolutely brilliant. If we could extend it, that would be great. Budget doesn't allow us to do it right now, but I think what it does is it demonstrates the importance that the government places on making sure that connectivity, because there's a number of members have stated about the value of that connectivity, not just to being able to get to workplaces, but there's the education. There's also the social aspect, and that was one of the things that I picked up when I was particularly in Orkney, that young people were actually travelling to some of the outer isles in ways that they wouldn't have normally done as a direct result of that free ferry travel that we've taken. And I'll take the intervention from Mark Roscoe.
Mark Roscoe.
Thank the Minister for giving way. One thing which the Government has committed to, very welcome, is a trial introduction of capped bus fares. Will the Government be looking at how that works with free bus fares to perhaps help people that reach the age of 22 and then no longer have free travel anymore? How will the kind of findings of that pilot feed into wider consideration about how we make more travel free and affordable?
Minister, and give you the time back.
We are looking at the £2, the capped fare, and we're still working up where that pilot is going to be. There's a number of members across the chamber have been asking for it to be their area. Everybody wants it to be their area, and I actually accept that. In terms of looking what happens beyond the 22s, I've asked officials to have a look. What does happen beyond 22? Do people just simply drop out? How is it working? So there's a constant evaluation going on as to what our travel system looks like in Scotland. And the other thing that was asked for is that linked up, that connectivity between modes of travel. And that's something that we've clearly got our eyes set on as well. How do we make sure that ferries time with trains, time with buses, and make sure we've got that connectivity across all of the sectors that are there? Sorry, Mark Simpson, I've already answered you a bit. Graham Simpson, he said we've got to create a fairer system. And that's why I go back to why all the powers of the 2019 Act have now been delivered to the local authorities to deliver exactly that. It's the fairness in the system so that the local authority who has or the Transport Authority have that desire to do something in their own communities, have got the ability to do so. As I said, we've committed in 24 and 25, we've committed over £100 million across a number of infrastructure programmes across the walking, wheeling and cycling, because one of the other asks from the Youth Parliament is about active travel. It's really important. And when you go back to that Dear Scotland's Future, that kind of gives you that vision. If we're looking at the future, there's going to be far more walking, wheeling and cycling. That's why there's a commitment of £180+ million in the active travel budget right now, in order to make sure that we are making that future available to these young people who are telling us what they want. And I cannot commend them highly enough for their engagement, and I encourage every member across the chamber to keep that engagement going, because they will be the future of Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30.